Good morning, grade 10s. This is your final lesson on Anthem for Doomed Youth. In it, I'm just going to do a brief overview of the poem, and then we're going to go through the questions based on it in your perspectives pack. For those of you who don't have your perspectives pack, I have attached a copy, or I will have attached a copy in your team's class materials under war poetry. For those of you who do have your perspectives pack, I'm on page 203. Okay, so as we know, this poem is largely an Italian sonnet. That means that it is divided into an octave and a sestet. We know of an Italian sonnet that the octave usually provides outlines a problem, and then in the sestet a resolution is provided. However, in this poem, as you can tell by our reading of it so far, although there is a problem outlined in the octave, the problem of the way in which young male lives are wasted and treated as disposable in battle by the country, there is no resolution offered here. All that the sestet seems to do is to say that it is to remind us even more of the value of those lives that are lost by reminding us that each one of the men who die on this battlefield in the octave have left behind them a whole network of loving relationships that are now severed because of their sacrifice and their untimely and not very glorious death. So basically, the lack of provision for a resolution is more what Wilfred Owen is doing by not providing a resolution. Is he's saying that really there is nothing that you can do to make up for the kind of loss of life that war causes for so many young men and boys. There is no resolution. It is not a problem that can be fixed. The only way that this problem can be fixed is if it doesn't actually happen. It shouldn't happen. That is what Wilfred Owen is trying to say to his readers or the hearers of his poem. Also, what he is perhaps suggesting by focusing on the relationships of between the loved ones left behind and the soldiers themselves, he is focusing on the idea that perhaps if there is a resolution to this problem or something that can fix this problem, it can be found in empathy, in a loving and an empathetic attitude towards our fellow men. And that means that if we understood the true value of human life, if we loved one another the way that we should, if we respected and valued one another the way that we should, then we would not cause this problem in the first place. So it's a reminder of the value of human life in a very detailed and specific and way that is very difficult to ignore. And in so doing, there is a kind of a resolution, or rather a suggestion of how this problem can be resolved by changing one's perspective to be more empathetic. Then also, one thing I wanted to say is that the sonnet form during the early 1900s was usually, and before that in the 1800s, was usually used or reserved for love poetry. It was usually used to spread a message of, or to articulate some kind of a message of love. And in this poem, it's not a love poem. In other words, at least it's not a traditional love poem between a man and a woman, or a man and a man or a woman and a woman loving partners who are in a romantic relationship. This is not that at all. But I do think that there is a very specific reason why Wilfred Owen has chosen this form, which is traditionally reserved for love poetry, to write about these very young soldiers who die in war. And that is because he is wanting to remind us of the attitude we should have towards our fellow men, young and old, that we should be more loving towards fellow men. We should be more respectful. We should value their lives much more than we do when we expect them just to sacrifice themselves in this very inglorious way for the sake of their country. Okay, so let's look at question 1. Explain the effectiveness of the title. Well, from what we've discussed already, you know that the word anthem is used ironically because an anthem is usually a song of praise that expresses national pride and praise for one's country and patriotism. And so here, the fact that it's called an anthem for doomed youth shows us that, in fact, this anthem is not to praise the country. Rather, it is doing the unexpected. It is criticizing quite harshly the country and the government of the country that expects its young men to sacrifice their lives, and the country that dooms its youth to this very ghastly, gruesome death. Okay, and then doomed youth could be seen as an oxymoron in the sense that youth normally means vitality and life, opportunity and optimism, and it is associated with so many positive new beginnings and vital things. And here the word doomed placed next to youth says that the youth is the opposite of all of those things. It means that they lose their lives at a very young age. It means that they don't have hope, and their outlook is not optimistic. In fact, it is terribly gloomy and pessimistic. And so it's showing us just how wrong and unnatural the situation is for the youth of the country that asks them to sacrifice themselves in war, and specifically World War I. So what you would need to do in order to fulfill the 3-mark allocation is you'd have to say that the title of the poem is ironic, and then you'd have to analyze the diction. So you'd have to do an analysis of anthem, and you'd have to analyze the connotations of the word doomed and the word youth and the effect of putting them together, and how it creates this irony and this severe criticism of the country rather than praising the country. Question 2. How do the words "as cattle" in line 1 reflect the speaker's attitude towards war? So, as we know, this is part of the simile. These who die as cattle is a comparison using the word "as" to compare the way in which the soldiers die in battle in World War I to the way in which cattle are bred and then taken to the slaughterhouse to be used as meat for people to eat. So it reflects the speaker's attitude towards World War I in showing us that World War I, that the speaker believes that World War I is wrong, that it should never have happened, that the way in which it required young men to sacrifice and doom themselves was completely unacceptable. So you could use, please don't say that the attitude towards World War I is negative, rather say that it is pejorative or hostile. it is definitely a very hostile attitude towards World War One, because of the way in which these soldiers sacrificed so much, and so much was lost, and very little was gained. So you'd get your 3 marks there for saying that what is compared to what in the simile, and then your 2 marks would be for analyzing the connotations of the comparison of soldiers to cattle, saying that the speaker is comparing the soldiers to cattle in order to show the totally disrespectful, dishonorable way in which young male human life is treated by the nation. Shows that they're seen as nothing more than these automatons whose only purpose in life is to fight for the country, and that they have no other value other than for their usefulness to the country in battle. It completely denies all of their individual qualities and talents and dreams and beliefs and value. And so it shows just how terribly hostile the speaker's attitude towards World War One is. And then you will get your 3 marks. Question 3, explain the effectiveness of the alliteration in lines 3 to 4. In lines 3 and 4, the alliteration or consonance is: only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. So you can see that there is an alliteration on the letter R. I'm trying to do a highlighter here, but it doesn't seem to be working. Oh well. On the letter R, stuttering rifles, rapid rattle, and then patter their hasty orisons. So the reason why I say it's consonants as well as alliteration is alliteration, the letter normally occurs in the beginning of the word, so the alliteration is in rifles, rapid rattle, but consonants, the same letter appears in different parts of the word, and often on the unstressed syllable as well as the stressed syllable. So stuttering, patter, there, and orisons all have an R on the unstressed syllables. And the reason why, what is the effect of the alliteration? Well, we discussed that it mimics the sounds of the battlefield, and specifically it mimics the sound of rifle fire. Stuttering rifles, rapid rattle, can patter out their hasty orisons. It's up the rhythm, and it creates a very panicked impression of how the soldiers basically have to spend every single second that they're on this battlefield dodging rifle fire or some form of artillery or attack or gas shells or whatever it is. And it helps to create a rhythm of a much faster rhythm that is panicked, to show just how panicked the soldiers would be on the battlefield. And then question 4, find 2 other examples of sound devices used in stanza 1 and explain their effectiveness. Use a separate paragraph for each example. So the mark allocation is 4, which means you would get 2 marks for each example of a sound device. So another sound device is the word wailing is an onomatopoeia, and it is a sound that almost recreates or mimics again the shrill sound that is made by the shells, the gas shells that are being fired at the soldiers on the battlefield. And it creates this very disharmonious, discordant feeling of the horror of the war, and the constant attack that these soldiers were under. And then the other onomatopoeia could be stuttering, because stuttering is also an onomatopoeia, and it is a word again that mimics not only the stuttering sound, like the da of the guns as they're firing in the distance and close by, but also Wilfred Owen himself had a stutter as a result of his post-traumatic stress and his shell shock. And many soldiers, not just he, ended up with these terribly anxious conditions where they were almost unable to speak properly, and they were left with these speech impediments like stuttering that basically marred their ability to communicate with others. And so this word stuttering is very important, because it shows just how damaging an effect this kind of battlefield experience is on the ordinary young man who had to fight in it, that it actually caused many impediments. Even if he did survive and he didn't die on the battlefield, he would have been left with all sorts of anxious, nervous conditions and speech impediments that would have gotten in the way of him living a normal life after the war. Okay, so if you can find any other sound devices in this stanza, please feel free to do so and write about them and write an analysis of that particular sound device. Question 5. What is the tone of stanza 1? Substantiate. Well, you'd have to think carefully. The tone is the feeling, the emotions of the speaker towards the subject matter. So now you could say the tone of the speaker towards the war itself and all of the young male life that is lost during war, you could say is mournful. You could say that it is agonized, like it is in agony at the losses that are incurred in people's lives. It depends, though, what you're focusing on as the subject matter. If you're focusing on the speaker's attitude towards the country that asks its soldiers to die in this way, well, then you are the attitude would be hostile. It would be angry. It would be severely, harshly critical of the war and what it does to young life. However, if you're looking at the tone of the speaker towards the young soldiers themselves, then it is mournful, it is melancholy, it is deeply, deeply in agony and sadness at the way in which so many young people had to suffer in this battle. So be specific. If you want to say that the tone is angry and hostile, then you need to say it is angry and hostile at what? And if you want to say that it is sad and mournful, then you need to say that it is sad and mournful towards what or whom. Okay. Then, question 6.1. Find and quote 3 images relating to light in the sestet. So in the sestet, you have the image of candles. You have the image in line 11 of holy glimmers. And you have the image of dusk. So dusk is sunset, that involves the sun setting, which has something to do with light. And you also have the word shine. So you can select any 3 of those. And then you need to, in 6.2, find and quote 2 images relating to dark in the sestet. You can look at the pall, which is a cloth that is laid over a coffin. When you're under a cloth, the light is cut off, so you can't really see. So that's an image that relates to darkness. Dusk also relates to darkness in that it's got to do with the sun setting and going down and the beginning of nighttime. And then the image of the drawing down of blinds. So you're shutting out the light inside the house that is coming from outside of the house. And then in 6.3, briefly explain the symbolism of light and dark as used in the sestet. So obviously the symbolism of light in this poem has to do with life. It is associated with the youth themselves and the vitality that they possess, the very valuable skills and talents and love that they have to offer, the potential that their life holds. And the dark, the imagery that relates to darkness is symbolic of the death, the horrible doom and the suffering that they are expected to endure as a result of their country's demands. So that's got to do with loss of life. So the light has to do with life, and the darkness has to do with the loss of life and the sacrifice of all of that potential that those young men had. And then question 7, explain the effectiveness of the metaphor in the final line of the poem. Each slow dusk is a drawing down of blinds. Well, it shows us that the losses of World War I are so severe that it's not just individual families here and there drawing down the blinds of their house to show everybody in the town that they've lost a loved one. Nature itself, the sun going down itself, is a drawing down of blinds every day. And it takes this drawing down of blinds in one particular household and magnifies the scale of it, augments the scale to such a degree that you see that nature itself, the sun itself, the universe itself is in mourning and drawing down its blinds as a sign of mourning for so much life, the sheer magnitude, the sheer numbers of lives that were lost, that it's a bad thing if even one of these young male lives is lost. And here we have how many millions? I think it was 8 million or some much more probably, people who died in World War I. Young men died fighting in World War I. And so it just to show that nature itself is drawing down its blinds every day shows that the scale of loss was so vast that nature itself was kind of grieving the loss of so much human life and what human beings were doing to each other. That it is, and it creates the impression of how deeply unnatural and wrong it is to sacrifice young life in this way. And then in question 8, write a good paragraph of at least 10 to 15 lines in which you explain whether you agree or disagree with Wilfred Owen's attitude towards war. Remember that when a question is asking you for your opinion, it's not a free rein just to write whatever you want and get marks for it. Your opinion needs to be informed, and it needs to be informed by the details of the poem. So you can take either side. You can say you disagree with Wilfred Owen's poem, attitude towards war in this poem, because you feel like war is necessary, but then provide your reasons for why you believe war is necessary, and also write the conditions under which you believe war to be necessary. Is it only when the young people volunteer to be soldiers, or do you feel that it's right for the country to make conscription compulsory, and that young men should always be ready to sacrifice their lives in this way, for the good of the country, and then to explain why, and then also to quote from the poem, or perhaps from other resources that have enabled you to develop this opinion, this informed opinion about the necessity of war. Then, if you choose to take the other way and you choose to agree with Wilfred Owen's attitude towards war, then there's a lot of material here that you can draw on and use your SQAs. So state your stance and then quote one or other image or passage or word from this poem that helps us understand why it is that you agree with Wilfred Owen's attitude towards war, that it is unacceptable, and in the way that it dooms the young men of the country to die, and leaves the country, in a sense, hollowed out, with no more young men to fill the gaps that were left by their sacrifice. So, grade 10s, I hope that you will find answering these questions relatively straightforward after these explanations. If you do still have any other questions about this exercise, then please feel free to send me a message on chat during your lesson or after you've watched this video. Have a brilliant day, everybody.